I never thought I'd be posting here, but I guess life has a way of throwing curveballs you never see coming. My name is Jake, and for a long time, I thought I had the perfect life. I was dead wrong. A little backstory: Jamie and I met in college. She was smart, beautiful, and had this way of making every room she walked into feel a little brighter. I was studying criminal justice and had already set my sights on joining the Marine Corps. We dated for a while, but after graduation, I shipped off for training, and life took us in different directions. Years later, we reconnected through an online dating site. It felt like fate. I had a solid career in the Marines, and she was working as a nurse. We fell hard, got married, and built a life together. 2 daughters, a nice house, and what I thought was a strong marriage. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some things are too good to be true. It started with the little things: small arguments over nothing, excuses to spend more time apart, a coldness between us that hadn't been there before. I chalked it up to stress. 2 kids and a demanding career will do that to you, right? Then, I found it. A tiny piece of lace in the laundry. A black thong that I knew didn't belong to Jamie. Not her style, not her size. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe she bought something new. Maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, my gut was already screaming the truth at me. I ignored it. Because I didn't want to believe it. That was my first mistake. I wish I could tell you that I confronted Jamie right then and there, that I demanded answers, and she confessed everything. But that's not how it went. Instead, I did what a lot of people do when they're faced with something they don't want to accept: I buried it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for that lingerie. Maybe she was trying to surprise me, or maybe a friend left it over somehow. Yeah. I was in full denial mode. But deep down, something had shifted. I started noticing more things. Our sex life had already been on a slow decline, but now it was practically non-existent. She'd give me half-hearted excuses: she was tired from work, stressed about the kids, not feeling great. And at first, I believed her. I mean, we'd been together for years. I knew how exhausting life could be. But then came the other changes. Jamie started picking fights over stupid things. I'm talking about full-blown arguments over things that wouldn't have even caused a second thought before. One night, she lost it over me forgetting to pick up the dry cleaning, something that had never mattered to her before. Another time, she accused me of being too controlling, because I asked when she'd be home from a girls' night. And then there was her phone. Jamie had never been secretive with her phone before. We used to be the kind of couple who could grab each other's phones without a second thought, texting for each other, playing music, looking up directions. But suddenly, her phone was always with her. She started taking it to the bathroom, keeping it on silent, flipping it over whenever she put it down. At first, I tried to ignore it. I wanted to believe that everything was fine. Then my friend Kevin gave me the final push I needed. Kevin and I had been friends since boot camp. He was the kind of guy who didn't sugarcoat things, and I respected that about him. One afternoon, he called me up and said, "Hey, man, I don't know how to say this, but I saw Jamie at the farmer's market today. She was with some guy. Holding hands. And I'm pretty sure they kissed." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my brain was still fighting reality. "That's impossible," I said. "She told me she was at work." Kevin was quiet for a second before saying, "I knew you'd say that. That's why I took a picture." My stomach dropped. A minute later, my phone buzzed. I opened the message, and there it was, my wife, standing in front of a stall full of organic vegetables, smiling up at some guy like he was the only person in the world. His hand was wrapped around hers. And yeah, the next photo showed them kissing. I wish I could say I exploded in rage or had some dramatic moment of clarity, but honestly, I just felt numb. Like the world had tilted sideways, and nothing made sense anymore. I didn't respond to Kevin right away. I just stared at my phone, feeling like an idiot. I knew Jamie had been pulling away from me, but I had been too blind, or too stupid, to see what was right in front of me. That night, I lay in bed next to my wife, watching her sleep, wondering how long she had been lying to me. And then, for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt something other than pain. I felt cold. Calculated. Jamie thought she was being smart. She thought she could fool me. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that picture, Jamie holding hands with some guy, kissing him like I never existed. By morning, I knew what I had to do. Confronting her right away would have been the emotional response. And trust me, I wanted to shake her awake and demand answers. I wanted to scream, ask her how long she had been lying to me, if she ever really loved me, if any of it had been real. But I didn't. I forced myself to think logically. I needed proof. Kevin's picture was solid, but if this went to court, I needed more. I had seen what messy divorces could do to guys, especially military guys who traveled for work. I wasn't about to get screwed over by a cheater. So I played along. That morning, when Jamie woke up, I kissed her on the forehead like I always did and got ready for work. She smiled at me, yawned, stretched, like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't sneaking around behind my back. It made me sick. I left the house, drove down the street, and parked around the corner. Then I waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, Jamie left the house, dressed up way more than she ever was for work. I followed her. It felt surreal, like I was in some low-budget spy movie, tailing my own wife through the city. But I kept my distance, watching as she pulled into a parking lot near a coffee shop. And then he showed up. I finally saw him in person. Tall, athletic build, wearing a button-down like he was trying too hard to look casual. She lit up when she saw him, happier than I'd seen her in months. That hurt. They went inside together. I parked and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My whole body screamed at me to go inside, to make a scene, to do something. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started recording. Jamie had no idea, but her perfect little affair was about to come crashing down. Sitting in that car, watching my wife laugh and flirt with another man, was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I kept the camera steady, zoomed in just enough to get clear footage without being obvious. They were all over each other, touching hands across the table, leaning in close, Jamie laughing at whatever garbage he was saying. I felt nothing. Not yet. After a while, they got up and left the coffee shop together. I followed at a distance as they walked to his car, a sleek black BMW. She stood close to him, her hand on his chest like they were in some rom-com, and then she kissed him. Right there in the open, in broad daylight. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I had my proof. Now, I needed more. Jamie had no idea, but I had already made up my mind, I was going to destroy her. I drove home, my mind racing. I wasn't just some random guy she could cheat on and walk away from. I was a Marine. I knew how to be patient. I knew how to gather intel. And most importantly, I knew how to strike when the enemy least expected it. That night, when Jamie came home, she acted completely normal. Kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, played with the kids like she wasn't betraying everything we had built. I played along. I told her I'd be leaving for a short work trip next week. She smiled and said she'd miss me. I bet she would. It was probably going to be a mini vacation for her, time to sneak around without worrying about me coming home early. Except I wasn't going anywhere. I was about to set the trap. The plan was simple. Jamie thought I'd be out of town, but I wasn't going anywhere. Instead, I was about to watch her unravel in real time. I told her I had a last-minute work trip coming up and that I'd be gone for a few days. She acted disappointed, pouting like she actually cared. "I'll miss you," she said, wrapping her arms around me. I fought the urge to push her away. Instead, I smiled. "Yeah, I'll miss you too." The night before my trip, I packed a bag, left it by the door, and set my work boots next to it, little details to sell the illusion. Jamie went to bed early, probably so she could text him without me seeing. At 5 a.m., I left. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my bag, and walked out the door like I was heading to the airport. I drove down the street, turned the corner, and parked. Then I waited. At first, nothing. Maybe she was waiting to be sure I was really gone. But by 10 a.m., she left the house, dressed up again, looking way too put together for a lazy day at home. She didn't go to work. She didn't run errands. She went straight to his place. I had already suspected she was using my travel days as her personal cheat pass, but seeing it confirmed with my own eyes. That was different. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was just ready. As soon as she walked into his house, I took the next step. I had installed hidden cameras inside our home the night before. Nothing illegal, just small motion-activated cameras in the living room, kitchen, and bedroom. If she planned to bring him here while I was gone, I'd have all the proof I needed. And based on what I had seen so far, I was willing to bet she would. Now, all I had to do was wait. I spent the next few hours parked a few streets away, watching my phone, refreshing the camera feeds from the house. Nothing yet. Jamie was still at his place, and I knew exactly what she was doing. It wasn't hard to guess. But I wasn't just sitting there wasting time. While she was busy ruining our marriage, I was making calls. First, to my lawyer. I didn't say much yet, just that I suspected infidelity and wanted to know my options. She gave me the rundown on what I'd need for a divorce case, how custody battles usually went, and, most importantly, how to protect my assets. Then, I made another call, to an old buddy from the Marines who worked in private security. I told him I needed some extra eyes on someone. No questions asked, just a favor. He agreed to tail Steve. Yeah, I finally had the guy's name, and find out whatever he could. By the time Jamie finally left his place and drove home, I had everything set in motion. She walked into our house like it was just another normal day. I watched the live feed on my phone as she went straight to the mirror, fixing her hair, making sure she didn't look too obvious. Then she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, probably texting him. I almost laughed. She had no idea she was already caught. Then, an hour later, my phone buzzed. Motion detected, in our bedroom. I tapped the feed, and my stomach clenched. She wasn't alone. Steve had walked right into my house. I stared at my phone, watching the live feed as he walked through my house like he belonged there. Steve. The guy Jamie had been sneaking around with. I watched as she led him through the hallway, laughing, touching him, acting like they didn't have a single care in the world. Like I didn't exist. Like our kids didn't exist. They went into our bedroom. My bedroom. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. I had known this was happening. I had prepared for this. But seeing it in real time. Watching it play out on my screen. That was different. That was a whole new level of rage I didn't know I was capable of feeling. And still, I stayed calm. I let the cameras do their job, recording everything in high definition. I wasn't about to bust in there and give them the satisfaction of some big dramatic scene. No, I was playing the long game. So I waited. An hour passed. Then another. Eventually, Steve left. Jamie walked him to the door, kissed him goodbye, then locked up like it was just another regular day. She had no idea her life was about to fall apart. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay focused. I had everything I needed now, video proof of her infidelity inside our home. Time for the next phase. I backed up all the footage to multiple locations, cloud storage, an external hard drive, even an encrypted USB just in case. Then I called my lawyer back. "It's time," I said. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone screen, watching the live feed of my own home like some twisted security guard. The house was quiet now. Jamie had gone about her evening routine like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just brought another man into our bed. Like she wasn't lying to my face every single day. I had what I needed, but I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Securing the evidence. First thing I did was make damn sure my evidence was safe. The footage was already backed up to multiple locations, but I wasn't taking any chances. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud drive that only I had access to. I transferred copies onto an encrypted USB drive and placed it in a locked safe at a friend's house. I even printed out time-stamped stills from the video, clear, undeniable proof of what she had done. Then, I started compiling everything into a neat little package for my lawyer. Asterisk time-stamped video evidence, check. Asterisk screenshots of their texts, which I later retrieved from our phone records, check. Asterisk a detailed timeline of her movements, including the days she lied about where she was, check. When I was done, I had something airtight, something no judge could ignore. The legal strategy. The next morning, I had my first real meeting with my lawyer. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had handled plenty of cases like mine before. "With the evidence you have," she said, flipping through the files I handed her, "this is going to be a slam dunk." I nodded. "I don't just want a divorce. I want full custody of my kids. And I want to make sure she gets as little as possible." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "That's going to depend on a few factors. Courts don't always grant full custody unless you can prove the other parent is unfit. But..." She tapped the folder. "This helps. A lot." "She brought another man into our home while the kids were asleep in the next room," I said, voice like steel. "I'd say that makes her unfit." My lawyer nodded. "It's a strong case. We'll push for full custody, no alimony, and a favorable division of assets. The more dirt we have on her, the better." That's when I decided to take things a step further. "You said dirt helps, right?" She raised an eyebrow. "Yes." I smirked. "Then let's get more. Digging into Steve. I wasn't just going to take Jamie down, I was going to make sure the guy she cheated with paid too." That afternoon, I met up with my old Marine buddy, the one I had asked to start looking into Steve. "You're gonna like this," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were pages of records, screenshots, and notes. Turns out, Steve wasn't just some random guy. He was a predator. Asterisk he had a history of blackmailing women. Asterisk he had hidden cameras set up in his own house, recording his conquests without them knowing. Asterisk he had been accused of coercion before, though nothing had ever stuck. My stomach churned as I read through it. Jamie hadn't just cheated, she had gotten involved with someone who actively destroyed people's lives. And now, I was going to make sure that came back to bite them both. The next move. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. First, I called my lawyer again. "I've got more information," I told her. "We need to add it to the case." Then, I made another call. To Jamie's dad. He and I had always gotten along. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the kind who valued loyalty and honesty. He loved his grandkids. And I had a feeling he wouldn't take this news lightly. "Jake." His deep voice answered. "What's up?" I exhaled slowly. I need to talk to you. In person. It's about Jamie. There was a long pause. Then, finally, come by the house. I grabbed my evidence folder, got in my truck, and drove over. Jamie had no idea what was coming. I pulled into my father-in-law's driveway, gripping the folder tight in my hands. I had always respected the man. He was tough, old school, and believed in hard work and family above all else. I knew this wasn't going to be easy for him. I knocked on the door, and within seconds, he was there, his usual stern expression in place. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. I walked in, the weight of everything I was about to say pressing down on me. We sat in his living room, and he looked me over. "What's going on?" he asked. I didn't sugarcoat it. "I have proof that Jamie's been cheating on me," I said flatly, setting the folder on the coffee table. "And it's worse than that." His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. "Show me." I opened the folder and laid everything out. Screenshots of her texts. Photos of her with Steve. Stills from the video footage of him in our bedroom. He picked up one of the pictures, staring at it in silence. Then he set it down, rubbing a hand over his face. I expected anger. Maybe disbelief. What I didn't expect was the deep sigh that came from him. "I had a feeling," he muttered. That caught me off guard. "You did?" He nodded slowly. "Jamie's been distant. Avoiding family gatherings. Always on her phone." I didn't want to believe it, but, deep down, I knew something was off. His eyes met mine, filled with disappointment. I didn't raise her to be like this. I swallowed hard. Despite everything, I felt a pang of sympathy. He was hurting too. "There's more," I said. "The guy she's with? Steve. He's a piece of shit." I handed him the next set of documents, the ones about Steve's history of blackmail and hidden cameras. His face darkened as he read through it. His hands clenched into fists. "This bastard is dangerous," he muttered. I nodded. "And Jamie's mixed up with him. I don't know if she knows what kind of person he really is, but I do know she's bringing him around our kids." That was the final nail in the coffin. His eyes snapped to mine. "What do you need from me?" "I'm filing for divorce. I want full custody of my daughters. No alimony, no shared assets. I want her out of my house, and I want to make sure this guy never gets near my kids." Without hesitation, he nodded. "I'll help however I can." A part of me felt relieved. I wasn't in this alone. "Jamie's not going to see this coming," I said. "I need to hit her with everything at once. The divorce, the custody papers, and," I hesitated. "I need her to know who Steve really is. I need her to see the truth before she gets dragged down with him." His expression hardened. "She made her bed, Jake. But if there's a way to wake her up before it's too late, I'll do what I can." I stood up, shaking his hand. "Thanks." As I walked to the door, he called after me. "When are you telling her?" I glanced back. "Soon." I had a plan. Jamie had no idea her world was about to come crashing down. I left my father-in-law's house feeling more determined than ever. I had everything lined up, proof, legal backing, and now even her own father on my side. All that was left was to drop the bomb. The next evening, I told Jamie I had come home early from my work trip. She barely batted an eye, probably thinking she had gotten away with everything. She was in the kitchen when I sat down at the table and slid the folder across to her. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "Open it." She did. And for the first few seconds, I watched her face carefully. The confusion. Then the widening of her eyes. The way her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the evidence, her texts, her pictures, the stills from our bedroom. Silence. Then, the excuses started. Jake, I can explain. No. You can't. My voice was calm, controlled. It's over, Jamie. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going for full custody. She stared at me, her face pale. You can't do that. I can. And I will. I stood up. Oh, and by the way, your boyfriend? He's not just a cheater. He's a predator. You might want to check the last few pages. She frantically flipped to the part about Steve, his blackmail, his hidden cameras, the women he had targeted before. Her breath hitched. And for the first time since this all started, I saw something real on her face. Fear. Jamie's hands shook as she read through the pages about Steve. Her face lost all color. This can't be real, she whispered. Oh, it's real, I said flatly. You didn't just cheat, Jamie. You let a predator into our lives. Into our home. She looked up at me, panic setting in. I didn't know. Of course, you didn't, I cut her off. You were too busy sneaking around to even think about who you were with. Tears welled in her eyes. Maybe they were real. Maybe they weren't. I didn't care. You're lying, she tried, her voice desperate. Steve isn't like that. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. Go ahead. Call him. Ask him yourself. See if he even picks up. She hesitated. Yeah, I scoffed. That's what I thought. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. She was spiraling. Jake, please, I don't want to hear it. I leaned forward. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. What about the girls? They stay with me. My voice was ice. You'll get visitation. But you don't get to decide anything anymore. I grabbed my folder, stood up, and walked toward the door. Just as I reached it, I turned back. Oh, and Jamie? I met her eyes, cold and unforgiving. You might want to warn your boyfriend. I doubt he'll like what's coming next. Then I left. Jamie didn't chase after me. She just sat there, staring at the mess of papers that had just shattered her reality. I didn't care. My next target was Steve. I had already put the pieces in motion. My buddy in private security had gathered enough dirt to bury him, and now it was time to let it all come crashing down. First, I sent an anonymous tip to his employer. A few well-placed screenshots and links to some of his private recordings were enough to ensure he'd lose his job. Companies don't like keeping guys who secretly film women without their knowledge. Next, I reached out to one of the women he had blackmailed. She had been too afraid to go to the police before, but with the evidence I provided, she was finally ready to press charges. That was all it took to set a legal case in motion against him. And just to twist the knife a little deeper, I made sure Jamie knew exactly what was happening. An hour later, I got a text from her. Jamie, what did you do? I smirked and typed back. Me, nothing he didn't deserve. By the next morning, Steve had been fired, his name was circling in the local news, and Jamie was in full meltdown mode. She called me 6 times. I ignored every one. She had made her choices. Now she had to live with them. By the next day, the fallout had begun. Steve was officially unemployed, and the charges against him were picking up steam. His reputation was ruined, and from what I heard, his real problems were just beginning. But I wasn't done yet. Jamie was spiraling. She had gone from texting me non-stop to leaving frantic voicemails. At first, it was denial. Jake, please, we need to talk. You're blowing this out of proportion. Then came the excuses. I didn't know what Steve was really like. You have to believe me. Finally, the desperation. Please, don't take the girls away from me. I made a mistake, but I'm still their mother. That last part almost got to me. Almost. But then I remembered the way she had laughed with Steve, how she had chosen to betray me, and I hardened my resolve. I met with my lawyer again that afternoon. With all the evidence I had, the divorce was moving forward quickly. I was pushing for full custody, and based on everything we had, the chances were in my favor. Jamie had no clue just how bad this was going to get for her. That night, she showed up at my door. Disheveled. Tear-streaked. A complete wreck. "Jake, please," she begged, voice cracking. "Just let me explain." I stared at her for a long moment. Then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I said, "You lost that chance a long time ago." And then I shut the door in her face. After I shut the door in Jamie's face, I stood there for a moment, listening. She didn't knock again. She didn't yell. I heard a soft, broken sob, and then, finally, the sound of her footsteps retreating. I won't lie, there was a part of me that felt something. Not sympathy, not regret, but a hollow kind of sadness. This was the woman I once loved. The mother of my children. And she had thrown it all away. The court battle begins. The next week, my lawyer filed the divorce papers. Jamie was officially served. She tried to call me again, but I let everything go to voicemail. A few days later, I got an email from her lawyer. She wanted to negotiate. I met with my lawyer, who smirked when she read Jamie's requests. "She's trying to play the victim now," she said. "She's asking for joint custody and a financial settlement." I laughed. Not happening. Jamie had no job lined up, she had been comfortable as a stay-at-home mom while I provided. She was probably hoping I'd cave and agree to some kind of financial support. But with the evidence I had, that wasn't going to happen. We rejected the offer and pushed forward with our case. At the first hearing, Jamie showed up looking rough. She had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes, her usual confidence gone. Her lawyer tried to argue for her rights, but when we presented the evidence, her infidelity, her bringing Steve into our home, the proof of her lies, it was over before it even began. The judge was not impressed with her behavior, especially with the fact that she had exposed our children to a man like Steve. I was granted full custody of our daughters. Jamie was given supervised visitation until further review. And because of her actions, she wasn't entitled to a single cent of my money. No alimony. No financial support. Nothing. She had ruined our marriage, and now, she had nothing left. The aftermath. After the ruling, Jamie tried to approach me outside the courthouse. "Jake, please," she said, her voice small. "I made a mistake." I looked at her, the woman I once trusted with everything, and felt nothing. "You sure did," I said, then turned and walked away. That was the last real conversation we ever had. And what about Steve? Steve didn't escape unscathed either. With multiple women coming forward, he was looking at serious legal trouble. Blackmail, illegal recordings, and even potential jail time. Last I heard, he was trying to lay low, but his name was already trashed in the community. He was done. Jamie had thrown away our marriage for him, and now she had nothing to show for it. Moving forward. Life got better for me after that. I got to keep my house, my kids, and my dignity. Jamie, on the other hand, she was living with her parents, struggling to rebuild her life. She tried to reach out a few times, but I kept my distance. Our daughters were my priority now. And as for me, well, let's just say I wasn't single for long. But that's a story for another time. A year passed. Looking back, it felt like a lifetime ago that I was sitting in my car, watching my wife betray me in real time. The pain, the anger, the disbelief, it all felt so distant now. Like a bad dream I had finally woken up from. Jamie? She never really recovered from what she lost. Where she ended up. After the court ruling, she had no choice but to move back in with her parents. She tried to rebuild her life, but with no job, no money, and a reputation in shambles, it wasn't easy. She bounced between temp jobs for a while, eventually finding a part-time gig at a local clinic. But it was a far cry from the life she had before. She still saw the kids during her supervised visitations, but it was clear they didn't see her the same way anymore. They loved her, but they trusted me. And Steve? That guy was finished. The charges against him stuck, and he ended up serving time. Not much, but enough to ruin any shot he had at a respectable life. From what I heard, he moved out of state after getting out, trying to start over. Jamie had thrown everything away for that guy. And now, she had nothing. Where I am now. As for me, I moved on. I focused on being the best dad I could be, on healing, on making sure my daughters never had to feel the weight of what their mother did. And, yeah, I eventually met someone new. Her name is Lisa. She's kind, patient, and, most importantly, she's nothing like Jamie. She knows my story. She knows what I've been through. And she never once made me feel like I had to rush into anything. She met my daughters, and they adored her from the start. Seeing them happy again, seeing myself happy again, made me realize just how toxic my marriage with Jamie had become. I got my life back. And Jamie? She's just a chapter in a book I've already finished reading. Final thoughts. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. Trust your gut. The signs were there, long before I caught her. I just didn't want to see them. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. I lost my marriage, but I gained something more valuable, my freedom, my self-respect, and a future that no longer has room for betrayal. That's the real win. Thanks for following my story, Reddit. Stay strong out there.